I guess we can get started. Thanks for coming. My name is Gordon Pike. I'm a technical architect at 3Share. And Jess wanted me to talk about the future, prepping for tomorrow. Why architecture matters. Yeah, failing to plan is planning to fail. It's not, if you don't do a plan, doesn't mean that you don't have an architecture. You just may not have the architecture you want. You end up with an architecture whether you plan for it or not. And when you build a plan, when you build a house, you have a plan. So you should have a plan when you build the architecture too. If not, then what you end up with is a Winchester mansion. So Sarah Winchester, for 34 years, she acted as her own architect. She built the mansion that had 161 rooms. There are stairways that go up to the ceiling and stop. There's closets and doors that go to nowhere. There's a closet on the second story that opens up to the sink in the first story. They say that a lot of times with the construction, she had a handwritten plan, drawing, and she'd give it to the construction workers, and they would put her stuff. A lot of times when she's in a seance, she would get some divine, invent, and then she'd come up with a plan like that and go take it to the construction workers, and that's what happened. So, when we start to do an architecture, you want to make sure that you have a valid plan. Myths that we tell ourselves: it takes too long up front. It delays any real progress because it's really difficult when you start out, and if you don't spend the time to do the architecture, or if you do spend the time to do the architecture, a lot of times people are looking, what real progress did we make on that? And the other thing is, if you have a plan, you limit creativity, because a lot of times when you have an architecture, you've got constraints on what tools you can use and what directions that the developers can go to. And usually when you're doing an agile process, they think that the architecture is not part of that, which isn't the case at all. The real question is, do you want to start fast or do you want to end fast? A lot of times you can start out and you can make great progress, but after a while, every one of the decisions and wrong turns that you make it more difficult to get any progress. And by the time you get to the end of a project, it may take a heroic effort for the team to be able to finish and complete the project. Whereas if you took some time up front and you consider the architecture, then towards the end, you would be making your most progress. And again, with architecture, projects have a start and finish, but the architecture goes on past that, because once you've finished the project and it's in production, you're also looking at how maintainable is it? How do you keep it up? How do you debug it once it's out in the field and find out when there's a real problem? It's always a continuous process. You're always looking at the architecture you have. There's always changes. Today you may make a decision and come up with an architecture. Tomorrow something else comes in, a new different, something with a business, or there may be a new channel that comes up, and you have to make improvements. So what are the goals of an architecture? We want to make sure that that's reliable. A cloud-first architecture, always up. That's like where you should be starting. Agility. You don't want to paint yourself in a corner. A lot of the times, you just want to make sure that when something changes, or when you need to make a change, that you're not locked in. So it reduces costs, keep things simple, and retire old stuff. That's one of the things that a lot of companies forget, is you may have a legacy system and go through. We worked with a client where we went through a 6-month process. Actually, it was more like a year, and we came up with a new version of their services, but the old services were still maintained for another year. where, you want to get that stuff out of there, get it turned off, because there's a maintenance cost to that. As the longer the old system's there, the more of a cost. So how do you do it? The implementation, it takes some discipline. You want to be consistent with what you do. It's the same thing as with coming up with a brand. You want to have a consistent message for your customers. The same thing holds true with an architecture. You want to be consistent with what you do. When you, as a team, come up with this is the way we're going to do things, you want to make sure that you're accountable to that. That's why you need a governance piece. And you're repeating it over and over as you go through the system. That way, when somebody new comes to the system, they can make assumptions based off of what the architecture is, and they don't have to, there's not all these little caveats where there's this little piece that does something different. And with constraint, there comes creativity. It's kind of a, constraint is, you would think there's, especially in this country, we like to maintain our freedom, and as a developer always wants to be untethered and be able to come up with what's the newest, latest, and greatest. However, you can be more creative when you have constraints. A lot of times the more choices you have, the less innovative you will become. I mean, take for instance Starbucks. You have a handful of syrups, and you have milk and soy milk and things like that. But the ingredients themselves, there's less than 50, 100 ingredients. But there's 87,000 unique drinks that you can make with those ingredients. So even though there's a constraint there, there's a lot of flexibility in that. So how does AEM fit into the enterprise architecture? A lot of times when you bring AEM into the fold, it comes in as part of the marketing group. The IT group may resist it, or sometimes it'll get tunneled off, or it'll get put in the corner. But it's really, AEM's an investment, and it's funny how many of the clients that we work with don't seem to get the return on the investment that they have. They may be using it for one or two projects, and that's great, and it works in those instances. However, there's a whole rest of the enterprise that could use the services that they have already invested in for AEM. And the other part is silos suck. I don't know if any of you have been in a silo. They're especially fun when it's a day out where it's 100 degrees. Growing up on a farm, my grandparents had a farm, and when we would take and put an auger in the side of the silo, and it's great. You can fill the truck from the bottom up, and everything. Life's grand. When there's supply and demand, if you're a wheat farmer, it's great. You can hold the wheat over until you can get a better price. But at the bottom of the silo, somebody has to get in there, and somebody has to shovel the wheat into the auger. And you could feel like you're in your own personal circle of hell from Dante's Inferno. Easily reach 124 degrees. Some companies are like this. When you have silos and you have data silos, or content silos, you may have, each one of the departments have their own little slice of it. It's really difficult to have a consistent brand image when you have some data here and some data there. We consulted with a company, and they did a great job from the ground up. They built a system, but when we started talking to them, they were, because they didn't think of it to begin with, it was starting to drag on. When they had a release, they would release a new product, but then there's a lot of groups that needed to get involved. So somebody from the creative team would upload images to Google Drive and then put in a spreadsheet that existed, so it was ready for the presentation or for the rollout. And then there'll be several groups that would take that and then make changes for their sites. And then there's a coordination to get that on every site at the same time so that the release happened in a timely manner. And a lot of times that didn't work for them. But something like AEM, where you could actually put it in a centralized area and you could have all of the media, all the content in one place, and then take advantage of projects and take advantage of workflows, they could have easily streamlined that whole process. So what an architecture should look like with AEM, AEM should be like the looking glass into your data. Any enterprise has a lot of data sources. You may have third-party data sources, you have internal data sources, you may have many microservices, but it's really taking that data together, and where that data meets each other, that's where the value comes in, and that should happen at the AEM level. That's where all of the, where all of your applications will be. You want to be able to AEM should really be a content service, pulling that data together along with your analytics, along with anything coming up from your marketing tech, and then be able to support the channels that are in there. So along with desktop and with mobile, you may have IoT, chatbots, and the list goes on. There's going to be multiple channels in all channels. So the challenge is to have consistent content across those channels so that your brand has a consistency across there. And that's where AEM can help. The axis also, when you do a structure like this, you want to make sure that it's always going from the top down instead of, the last thing you want to do is have a spider web of somebody bypassing to get data, on the AEM side by using content fragments and experience fragments, and then as well as sling models, you're able to give a consistent front end to your data. So you can use AEM as both a classic CMS and as a headless CMS at the same time. It's really a great hybrid CMS, and there's times when one would be appropriate, and a lot of times where you may want to use a different one. There may be a channel that you can't support now with AEM, but you can when you use it as a service. So choosing an application strategy, once you have AEM in the mix, it's how do you reach the most channels with the least amount of work? Over the last few years, we've seen a growth, and there's actually more. There's more people coming from a mobile environment than are desktops. So, and that is actually growing at a rapid pace. What does that mean to us? It means that if you design, one of the catchphrases is design mobile first, but what does that really mean? What it means is that our clients want to have a first-class mobile experience. What that doesn't mean is that we want a desktop app that's been pushed into a mobile view period. What you want is the same thing as if you had a mobile application. You want it fast, you want it responsive. If you're on 3G, you want to have the same experience as if you're on 4G or if you're on 5G. You want to make sure that if you have intermittent service, that the app doesn't just reload. You want to make sure that your user doesn't know that there's intermittency there. So that's one of the things we want to keep in mind when we go to build applications. In the current enterprise, there are many different applications that we're looking at. To be able to cover all the channels that we have, there's a lot of different directions that you can go with your applications. The traditional multi-page applications like Granite and AMP, if you're accelerated mobile pages, those still have a place in a current enterprise. There's also single-page applications like a traditional SPA, AEM SPA editor application, or even our PWA. And then you've got the native track where you have an iOS or an Android application written in Swift or written in Kotlin. And if each one of them had a different content strategy, the silos just keep growing. You add into that with Windows EXE and Mac OS X applications. And then the specialized stuff like the chat bots and voice applications. And if you had one team for each one of these, you soon have an army to be able to deliver the same message across any channel that your clients are going to be talking to you with. There's also a difference in authorability. If you go with a Granite application, you have high authorability. The person actually doing the page doesn't have to be as technically in depth as as a developer, but when you start going into a third-party PWA, the developers are more in control of how that application is laid out. Even though authors more have control over what the content fragments or the media looks like. And in the middle of the SPA editor, it's kind of the best of the both worlds. At the low level, you're actually using SPA, but at a higher level, you're able to use responsive grid and be able to give your authors some control over the layout of the pages. In the middle of that, you have the accelerated mobile pages and the SPA. So over these targets, if you want to get the best coverage, what's the best approach for this? Well, with Granite, you've got, at the bottom you have the totals. With Granite, you can cover 3 of these. Just to give you a little idea what this is. So we have web, mobile, tablet, and all of the ones that you would normally have to target. You also have 3 different stores that you want to have coverage over, because you want to be in the mobile app store, so that means you're going to be in Apple in the iOS store. But Apple also has a desktop store, and you want to be in that as well. And then, of course, Google Play. There's only one of these approaches that allow you to be in all 3 of these with one application type, and that's PWA. With PWA, you can have one team, and you're able to have a broader coverage over all the channels that you're going to have. Any of the channels from web to mobile to tablet, you'll be able to cover that, as well as other ones. So you're able to, with a PWA, it can actually be a Chrome plugin. It's going to be native on the Windows App Store now, so instead of creating a Windows EXE, your PWA is able to be published onto that. And what is a PWA? So a single page web application, a PWA is just a specialized single page application. And what it's doing is it's following a set of best practices. So we use some technology such as service workers, local storage to be able to do that, so that in the background we can pull down content. We save it locally in case we have intermittent network connections, and we give the user a mobile experience, but with a web application. Google also defines a exemplary PWA, where we talk more about how we respond to push notifications, be able to be speedy and performant if we're doing 3G rather than 4G. Those are the kind of things that we should be doing as as an organization anyway. But with a PWA, there's a set of those practices, and Google's done a really good job of putting together tools to help you to validate. Are we there yet? With Lighthouse, you can get a Lighthouse score on your application and see how well you're doing. If you get up into the 90s, you're doing fairly well. If you're in the 50s, great. You're able to, you've got some work to do. So with that, PWAs, you know, right now, there's a lot of buzz around PWA, but some of it's warranted. You know, with PWAs, if you've ordered online with Starbucks lately, you're using their PWA. Best Western, when they did they put together their PWA, they had a 300% increase in their profits. Mobilify, they had 20% increase in their profit. West Elm, a 9% increase in profit. There's increases in recovery of abandoned shopping carts. Lancome, they experienced an 8% increase in that. Joomla, they got a 9x increase in their shopping carts. The customer experiences are also, the retention is higher than usual. So there's a lot of results that are coming out of PWAs, and so a lot of companies are looking to that. You know, with a mobile application, you can put together you can spend 3 to 6 months putting together an iOS application and go through the process and if you don't get denied the first time and you get the right to be able to publish it on there, most of the people don't download a mobile app. I mean, when was the last time that you downloaded an app to your phone? If they do, within a week, there's only a 60% chance that they still have it after that last week. And then from that point, really after 2 weeks, only 1 out of 10 people will still have your app on their phone. So does it really warrant an investment like that when you only have a 1 in 10 shot of being able to reach that customer? With a PWA, you're able to do that. You're able to upgrade it as soon as you have new content, as soon as you have a new application out there. It's in the hands of your users. They can save it to their home screen just as they have with any of their other mobile applications. And I don't know if you've ever had to go through the process of going with version 2, 3, and 4 of a mobile application, but it's a lengthy process, and you may get denied. You may have an application already there, but then you get denied. You go through that process. You finally get approval to be on the app, and you think, great, awesome. Now you're at the mercy of when the client decides that they want to upload that. You may be supporting 6 or 8 versions of your mobile application because there's just users that don't update their apps. With a PWA, you know that they're going to get the latest and greatest the next time that they click on your link. There's some crossover as well. There's areas where you may have a PWA, but you want to ensure, you know, with SEO. So Google is they're able to scan the JavaScript, and they're doing a lot of work as far as being able to maintain the SEO on that. But there's other search engines that you don't know what the coverage is, you know, on Bing or some of the other third-party. You may not have that same kind of that SEO. You may see SEO drop off. So one alternative is to use AMPs. You may have some AEM pages, and they're the ones that when a bot comes, you refer to your accelerated mobile pages, and you're able to maintain the SEO there. Or in the instance of if you're using React or if you're using Vue, then you do server-side rendering. So when you first bring up a PWA, you have basic pages that have the SEO that you want, and then as the application loads, then you replace that with more dynamic data. Same on the other side. You may want to add AMP and your traditional Granite APIs. Your component if you architect it right, you can have your components so that you can use it for both sites. So you may have a conditional flag in there if it's on the, whether it's going to produce AMP HTML or if it's going to do traditional HTML. You know, there's a lot of limitations with AMP. You're working with a subset of HTML and some specific HTML tags and CSS, and that's it. You don't have the luxury of being able to have JavaScript in that application. So it's great because Google will, you know, they're actually bringing forth the caching for those applications, but from the experience that you want your users to have, that may not be an ideal experience that you want. But you know, you have the option of bringing, you know, one or more of those strategies together. So moving on to that, you want to be able to select a component architecture. Yeah. What's supporting that? What browsers? Oh, okay. So most of the major browsers are doing that. So now natively, the Windows, like Windows 11, the browser, you're using polyfills for a lot of that. So like Edge, I believe, has native support for PWAs, and of course Google does. But there's polyfills for the rest of them. So you're able to get those out to the majority of the browsers that you'll be experiencing. Cool. So on a component level, excuse me. So when building our application, we want to, and from an architecture point of view, we want to make sure that we want to be able to go from requirements down to components and then use the components to be able to build our applications. There's 4 parts to that. There's a design systems, and normally what you'll see in a lot of teams is we start with page decomposition. So we know that we're going to have 20 pages and we have links between the pages. But there's another approach that's atomic, and you may go from the bottom up and be able to identify what components you're going to have. You need to pick a UI framework, whether it's one of the big 3, React, Vue, or Angular, or whether you're going with a multi-page app strategy like Granite or AMP. And then the component system, do you want to use, for instance, are you using React components, Vue components? Angular we'll talk about a little bit. It's not, you know, they're not as component-centric as Vue and React are. Or do you want to take a look at web components? And then the last part of it would be a component explorer. One of the things, it's great if you come up with a set of components. It's a whole nother thing to be able to allow your authors to be able to discover your component and be able to reuse it. Well, let's start with the atomic design. So what's the difference? Why atomic design? What does it really mean? It's actually a term that's been coined a couple of years ago by Brad Frost, but it kind of describes something that, you know, for a while we either go from a top-down or a bottom-up approach. In most teams, we go from a top-down. You go from the page and you start looking, okay, this kind of looks like a component here, looks like a header here, and we may have a form here. We can make a component out of that. What it does is it flips that upside down, and you start from the bottom and say, okay, I think we need a component that kind of, you know, something where we're able to put a user's name in there or a user's email and be able to click submit. Or like for search, for instance, be able to put our search term in there and be able to, so we need a button and a label and a text box. And then from there, you're building those, and you're able to use those to get to where you're building your pages and page templates. And that way you have a more consistency across all the pages. From a page level, when you go from that, sometimes you may not be as diligent about making sure that across the pages that you have a consistent look and feel. It's actually a design, it comes from the design world, but it actually works really well from an implementation point of view. When you're starting out from an atom, you're talking about the basic parts. So we're looking at, the text boxes, buttons, what they look like, what colors are we going to use, what's our typography, those kind of things. And then being able to put those together as molecules. So a molecule would be like the search box, being able to put together 2 or 3 of the atoms and be able to make that a component. And then you go from that and you're going into organisms. So you may have the search component, but it may be just a molecule that resides in your header, and your header may have a lot of things in there, as well as the menu system and maybe the user's name once they're signed in, or the ability to sign in and sign out. And then from that you build page templates, and then down to pages where you have instances of pages. By taking that approach, we can get to a more consistent UI and reduce the number of components that we have and identify ones that we can use and reuse over multiple applications. So taking this approach, this is kind of some instances of what components fit at which layer. So for instance, if we're taking a classic approach, the Coral UI, that's actually at the atom level. And then, when we go to React, with a SPA or PWA, you're going with the React UI. The one that you choose, you may have a material UI. And with Vue or headless, the same kind of thing. So it's a way of building from the bottom and building it up. Then you need to take a look at the UI and decide what is the approach that we're taking from that point of view. Instead of having a mix of these, which you could do, but again, we want to keep our architecture simple. It's easier to maintain. It's easier to debug. We want to be consistent with that. With Angular, it can be a steep learning curve. And with Angular, it's not really conducive to components. With Angular, you're using directives, and what directives are actually holding points on the DOM where Angular can introduce behavior, which is usually written in JavaScript. It's 500 plus K to bring that framework into your application. That opposed to React. With React, you have kind of a medium learning curve. You have the SPA editor approach, and the SPA editor today, out of the box, you have support for both Angular and for React. Vue is a future. In the future, it will do Vue as well. With React, the component has both the UI and the behavior, all within JavaScript. The size of it is less, it's 100K, and it utilizes virtual DOM. With Vue is actually even smaller as a footprint. It has the same kind of approach as React, where you have both the behavior and the UI in one component, and you're able to it uses virtual DOM underneath the covers for that as well. Dropping down from that, then you want to find out what component level system do you want to use. So in React, you could use, there's several UIs that you can use in there, and you may want to use web components. Web components are coming in their own right now. They're utilizing Shadow DOM, like the virtual DOM, to be able to bring the UI and to be able to create components. And then you have templates that you add in your HTML to be able to to bring that in. It's usually JavaScript as well. Your authors will use 0% of the components that they don't know about. So code reuse has been a mantra for years. We've seen it in many different forms. Back in the object-oriented days, you create objects and you put it out in the wild and everybody reuses them all over the place. Well, the reality of that is usually you may create the same for components. You may create a wonderful component, but if nobody knows about it, it's not going to be reused. They're going to build their own. And so before you know it, you're going to have 10 different components that do the same thing or roughly the same thing. That's where a component explorer comes in. I worked at a place, we did this 10 years ago, but it was all custom code. So we created a custom website where we put all the components on there, and the ability for a author or a developer to test drive that and to be able to discover what are the different options I can have for this component. When I do that, what's it look like? What's my UI looks like? Today, there are a number of different products that do that, but 4 of the top ones are here. So for web components, there's coming out of the Ionic framework, they have Stencil.js. It's a way to describe your web component, and then it will generate the code for whatever framework you're working in. So if you, for instance, are working in React, it'll generate React code. If you're using Vue, you can generate Vue code as well. The other one, Storybook. Storybook has a lot of support for Angular, for React, for Vue, so the big 3. And then your user has a good experience for being able to discover what your component does. The style guide it's React and Vue, or on the Angular side, you have Angular Playground. So what does a Component Explorer actually do? So up here we have a Storybook screen, and it should have a little, so a user can go in there, take a look at and find and explore for new components, but then they can look and play with all of the different properties that you may have for your component and look at what it does to the screen. So your team can go to the Storybook page first, take a look, is there a component first, is there a component that does what I want it to do? If there isn't, is there a property that we can add to it so that it has the functionality that I need? And then only third, do I need to add a new component? So in this way that you have the ability to have consistent components, be able to maintain your brand image across all of your applications, and hopefully reduce your costs of not only the development costs, but also the maintenance and being able to use those when you have more applications in the future. And lastly, this is an example taking those 4 pieces of a component architecture and how they might fit into a classic multi-page app, a hybrid PWA, or a headless PWA. Recommending Atomic as a way to do your decomposition. It helps to maintain consistency across your applications, either using Granite, React, or in the middle using both React and Granite View, because you're using the SPA editor and you're creating React components that are then being laid out by that.